the hours just before D-Day, thousands of Allied soldiers are readying themselves for the battle ahead.
Personally, I found myself saying a prayer. And it was a prayer that just didn't end. You just keep talking to yourself. And that prayer was not that may I live through this so much as may I do my job and not let your buddy down. That's the important thing.
The paratroopers flying into France are at the leading edge of a vast invasion force. Beneath them, thousands of amphibious assault troops, special forces divisions, and fleets of bombers leave the coast of southern England.
You could see all the ships at sea, literally hundreds and hundreds of ships, and you felt like you could walk from one deck to the other.
The invasion plan calls for landings on 5 different Normandy beaches. Americans to the west on beaches codenamed Utah and Omaha, and British and Canadians to the east on Gold, Juno, and Sword. Years of painstaking research has gone into this plan, with the most critical intelligence provided by air reconnaissance units.
Generals have to make decisions based on several factors. Are the beaches a practical place for landing? What are the problems when you get to the beaches? How heavily are they defended? And many of these things can be determined by photographs taken from high, medium, or low level.
Almost 1 million recon photographs have been taken in preparation for June the 6th. But tonight, the time for planning is over. The success or failure of D-Day now depends upon the men heading into France. D-Day begins just after midnight, when under the cover of darkness, 3 gliders are towed to the French coast. On board, Major John Howard and his elite airborne troops prepare themselves for their mission.
Personally, I was frightened to death. I was literally sitting in my seat in the glider, and my teeth were chattering, my knees were knocking. I thought, well, you know, this is my last time on Earth, and I'm going to I'll probably die within the next hour or two.
6.5 hours before the beach landings are due to begin, these men must capture Pegasus Bridge. Lying just 4.5 miles from the invasion beaches, the bridge must be taken intact. Allied forces will need to cross here as they fight their way inland. Air reconnaissance images have enabled the men to carefully plan their attack on the bridge.
We could see really every detail. We could see the design of the trenches cut into the banks of the canal. We could see a pillbox on the end of a canal. We could see other German positions all round the bridges, and therefore the detail that people were briefed on for this operation was intense.
But even with the best preparation, the capture of Pegasus Bridge will be fraught with danger.
I think practically all of us, without exception, thought that we were on a suicide mission. What really frightened us was the 21st Panzer, which was a real battle-hardened group. They were in the area around Caen, 6 or 7 miles from where we were landing, and they told us they had around 350 tanks between them. And we thought, my God, they only need half a dozen of those to come up the road, and we're in trouble.
The gliders now detach from the bombers towing them. And at just 16 minutes past midnight, the leading glider smashes down into the fields beside Pegasus Bridge.
I was in the first glider, and we hit the ground around about 100 miles an hour.
The airborne troops have landed just 47 yards from Pegasus Bridge, exactly as planned.
Then there was a great scramble to get out because, you know, the last thing you want to be when you just landed close to a guarded bridge is to be sitting in a wooden glider. Almost as soon as we cleared the glider, Major Howard, typical of him, he was up on the bank of the canal saying, "Come on, boys, this is it, come on!" And we all charged after him. We'd been told that the Germans had got explosives on the bridge, and as soon as they thought it was under attack, they'd been ordered to blow it up. So we had to get there fast. And Danny Brotheridge, who was our platoon commander, he went charging across the bridge. We went charging after him.
Lieutenant Brotheridge leads the charge across Pegasus Bridge.
We were shouting our heads off and making as much noise as we could to frighten the German.
Brotheridge fires the first Allied shots of D-Day, killing one of the sentries. But seconds later, he is himself struck down by shots from a German machine gun. The British lieutenant is the first Allied soldier killed by German bullets on D-Day. But his charge has had its desired effect. The other German guards beat a hasty retreat.
By the time we got to that end of the bridge, they had decided it was not a good place to be staying around. We scattered at either side of the bridge up and down the canal bank and took up all-round defensive positions.
It is now 21 minutes past midnight, and the airborne troops have taken control of Pegasus Bridge. Despite the first Allied casualty, it is an auspicious start to D-Day. The small group of Brits remain isolated behind enemy lines, with a long night ahead of them. They must now hold the bridge until reinforcements arrive. But with their limited supply of weapons, they may not be able to withstand an armored counterattack. Soon the men hear the comforting sound of Allied aircraft approaching. 23,400 American and British paratroopers are on their way to Normandy, and by 1 a.m. they are getting ready to jump. Lieutenant Dick Winters is one of those men flying into France.
When it comes around to the time to jump, the planes are supposed to slow down to about 95. Planes are supposed to slow down to about 95, 100 miles an hour. But in this case, when we started hitting anti-aircraft fire, and a couple of planes started getting hit, many pilots started to take evasive action. My plane was hit, went into a dive. At the same time he went into a dive, he threw me the green light to jump.
Many Allied pilots have never encountered anti-aircraft fire before this night. Some panic, flying too low and too fast to make successful drops. At high speeds, equipment is torn away from the paratroopers' packs.
The only thing I had when I hit was the maps that were in my pocket and a jump knife that was strapped to my leg. That's all I had. Behind the lines in Normandy on D-Day, no weapons, scattered all over the place. This is a great way to start a war.
"1 a.m. on June the 6th, 1944, and D-Day is underway. Over the next 24 hours, 156,000 men will be landed across a 50-mile wide stretch of coastline. Allied reconnaissance planes have photographed the entire length of the German coastal defenses, and the images they bring back strike fear into the hearts of Allied planners. This intelligence reveals that Hitler has built the greatest fortification in history. It is a 1,200-mile barrier of concrete and steel and is known as the Atlantic Wall. In charge of these defenses is Hitler's favorite general, master tactician, Erwin Rommel. For the recon pilot sent to photograph the Atlantic Wall, the risks are enormous.
I sometimes felt it was rather like being John Wayne on a horse out in front of the caravan going west, wandering around through the hills looking for the Indians and hoping that they wouldn't catch you and scalp you before you got home. We could cross the channel at about 50 feet below the radars at high speed, turn parallel to the beach at low tide, run all cameras while you're charging down the beach at about 350 miles an hour, more or less like a duck in a shooting gallery. We could see the iron structures which were sunk into the beaches at low tide and intended to stop landing craft which were coming up on those particular beaches.
Every single beach suitable for amphibious landings has been protected with heavy obstacles and numerous gun emplacements.
And photographs were taken of all those and returned to the intelligence people for further analysis.
To some recon experts, the Atlantic Wall looks impregnable and the beaches nothing less than a killing zone. Despite these misgivings, the invasion plan is now in motion, with 23,400 American and British paratroopers leading the way. Under the cover of darkness, they must land behind the Atlantic Wall, capturing strongpoints and securing beach exits. These troops must pave the way for the greatest amphibious invasion ever attempted. It will begin at dawn, just 5 hours from now. But already, the paratroopers are in trouble. Bad weather and pilot error have left them scattered all over Normandy. Many have no idea where they have landed, nor how to find their objectives.
It wasn't too long we ran into one of my sergeants who was coming down this road, and we had these little crickets, so with a click-clack. We exchanged greetings, and coming down the road, he had been smart enough to stop at a stone marker. This stone marker said St. Mure Eglise. I got under a raincoat one of the fellas had, because by that time I had about 12 men surrounding me. With the help of a flashlight another man had, I was able to orient the map very quickly, because the planes were coming in and they were flying from west to east. He had told me St. Mure Eglise is that town up there. There was St. Mure Eglise in my map. I knew exactly where it was.
Winters and his men are inland from Utah Beach, near the small village of Saint-Mère-Église. They are 5 miles from their objective, Saint-Marie-du-Mont. This town must be captured quickly to secure the area for the beach landings. But to reach Saint-Marie-du-Mont before dawn, the airborne troops must move with care through hostile territory.
You're behind the enemy lines. You do not walk on a straight line. You follow the cover that you have, and you avoid running into areas where you see a German machine gun firing. You don't walk right straight into something like that.
As Dick Winters and his men march towards Utah Beach, the British airborne troops who captured Pegasus Bridge sit tight. The Germans will want their bridge back, so another fight is all but inevitable.
Our task simply was anybody coming up that side of the canal bank to challenge them with the password and open fire on them if they didn't respond. In other words, to discourage counterattacks coming up the canal bank from the south.
At 1:30 a.m., the dreaded counterattack begins. At this time, Howard and his men first hear the rumble of distant vehicles. Before long, German tanks approach British defensive positions around Pegasus Bridge.
2 tanks suddenly started trundling up towards the bridge, and we thought, oh God almighty, you know, for tanks to come this soon, and we literally had nothing that would stop a proper tank, a big tank.
All the Brits have with them are 2 Piat guns, primitive grenade launchers that fire a small 3-pound bomb.
They were terribly inaccurate weapons. They were difficult to fire, and they were only effective out to about maximum of 100 yards, probably 50. We luckily had put one of our reserve platoons up near the road junction to the west of the bridges.
With them was Wagger Thornton, who was a very experienced old soldier, a sergeant. He was a real veteran. When these tanks arrived, Wagger got down with this Piat.
This may be the single most important shot of D-Day. If the first German tank is hit, the bridge may be held. But if Wagger Thornton misses, the Germans will recapture Pegasus Bridge and be free to push their armoured panzer divisions right onto the landing beaches. The British sergeant has only one chance.
Sergeant Thornton held his fire until the first tank was about 50 yards away from him. And he fired his Piat and hit it.
I think that caused pandemonium for the Germans. The guys in that tank obviously didn't survive. One of them had his legs blown off and he was laying on the road screaming his head off. The other tank, when that one was hit and blew up, went into fast reverse and trundled off the way they'd come. I think they probably reported back that we had all sorts of anti-tank equipment on the bridge and it wasn't safe for them to go near the place.
The Allies have repelled the first counterattack. But only 6 miles away near Caen, the men of the 21st Panzer Division wait beside their tanks. They could reach Pegasus Bridge in just 30 minutes, and their regimental commander, Colonel Hans von Luck, is desperate to push. But von Luck needs Hitler's personal authorization before he can advance.
We stood by our tanks ready to move at 2 or 3 a.m. The drivers had their engines running, but we received no orders about which direction to take. We smoked cigarettes and waited, and swore because we had no orders.
At 2:30 a.m., Hitler is sleeping hundreds of miles away in Germany. None of his staff has the courage to wake him with bad news from Normandy. Until Hitler awakes, his forces will be paralyzed. He has retained personal control over the tank divisions, leaving local commanders powerless.
Of course, from Berchtesgaden or from his command post in East Prussia, Hitler had no idea what the right decision would be for Normandy. The only people who can decide are the people on the ground. Hitler couldn't do that.
Hitler's most trusted general, Erwin Rommel, is in charge of the defenses. And if he were present in Normandy, he would lead the German counterattack. But tonight, a simple family gathering may change the course of history.
It was his wife's 50th birthday on the 6th of June, and you can understand why he would want to be at home. In Rommel's absence, there was no one who had the courage to make critical strategic decisions. That's the reason why they hesitated.
But in war, hesitation can be fatal. As dawn breaks on D-Day, the German defenders on the beaches have their first sight of the Allied forces. The biggest invasion fleet in history is sailing straight towards them. "3 a.m. and at air bases all over southern England, Allied bombers are being prepared for their part in D-Day. Frank Mays is a B-17 ball turret gunner and has not yet heard news of the invasion of France.
There were rumors that something big was going to happen. Nobody really knew what. One of the rumors was that they thought that the Germans were going to invade England. So everybody was pretty uptight.
Frank does not have to wait much longer before he learns the truth about June the 6th and D-Day.
They came through and got me out of the bed. We grumbled a little bit, went down to the flight line, and the briefing officer told us that this was the day that they were going to invade the continent. And at 4 o'clock in the morning, we took off. By this time, the sun was just lighting the sky in the east. I turned my turret to the rear and looked, and as far as I could see, there were airplanes, there were bombers.
The Allies will put a total of 5,112 bombers into the air on D-Day.
I could see the large ships down there blasting their guns, the big plumes of smoke. I could even see the white trails in the water of the landing craft as some of them began to take off.
Frank Mays is soon over his target, Omaha Beach.
We just carpet bombed a strip from out in the water, inland, for the invading forces to come in on. I saw shells exploding in the water, on the land, on the shore, and I was glad that I was not down there.
In the years since D-Day, controversy has raged over the accuracy of the Omaha Beach bombardment.
Not a single damn bomb was dropped on Omaha Beach. What in the hell is wrong with you guys? Can't you read the map? They had been ordered at midnight to delay their bomb drops up to 30 seconds. That would put them halfway to Paris, you see. So a lot of old French farmers back here they live in hell scared out of them. And a lot of fine dairy cattle, were killed.
Yet the bomber crews are certain that they did their job, and did it well.
I could tell that there had been a complete path bombed from the water for a full half-mile inland. There was nothing left down there.
To this day, the controversy is still unresolved. Certain beach areas were bombed effectively, but in other places, the German defenses remain intact.
Wir haben von der Bombardierung kaum etwas mitbekommen.
We were hardly touched by the aerial bombardment.
Der ganze Bombensee,
A great sea of bombs fell behind us,
im Land herunterkam, bei uns
but only a few exploded anywhere near our bunker.
eine Handvoll Bomben gefallen, aber nicht mehr.
Planners had expected the bombardment to obliterate German beach defenses. But the concrete pillboxes and bunkers overlooking the beaches are largely undamaged. The men heading in towards land know nothing of this. To them, the sight of vast bomber fleets hitting the coast is hugely reassuring.
The medium bombers were flying over, and you could hear the drone, the steady drone. It looked like they were pounding the coast pretty well, and it made us feel like that we were going to walk across the beach, because what could possibly, withstand all of that? And we were kidding each other on the deck, slapping each other on the back, see you on the beach, see you in Paris, and we were pretty upbeat about it.
The men prepare to move from the transport ship to the smaller landing craft that will ferry them in to the beach.
And you had to go down rope ladders to get into the landing craft. There was 30 men to each boat. And the sea was rough. And see, that landing craft was small. And it was bouncing up and down with the wave. When I got to the bottom, I thought I was going to drop just a couple of feet. I must have dropped 10 feet. It really shook me up.
We started circling around and around, waiting on the rest of the landing parties to get out of the big boat into the ocean. The sea was rough. I mean, it was really rough. You could see the white caps, and that's when everybody got wet and cold, and most everybody had gotten sick, and they were vomiting and using, their puke bag and throwing it over. And we were, 10, 11 miles out.
This image, captured on the morning of D-Day itself, shows Bob Slaughter's objective on Omaha. The hills behind much of the 4-mile length of this beach present a problem for the Allies. They prevent armor moving inland in support of the troops. Realizing this, the Germans have concentrated their defenses around a few key roadways leading inland. The Vierville Draw is one of these exit roads and is a key strategic objective for the Allies.
Our job on D-Day was to land at the Vierville Draw, which was probably the most heavily fortified of all the 50 miles of shoreline.
But before Bob Slaughter and his men can land on Omaha, American Special Forces, men from the Ranger battalions, must complete their own deadly mission. Atop towering cliffs between Utah and Omaha beaches is a battery of 5 heavy guns. They are ideally placed to pummel the invasion beaches with devastating firepower. This image reveals how heavily Pointe du Hoc has been bombed before D-Day in advance of the Rangers' attack. Ranger Leonard Lomel has studied these photographs in preparation for his mission.
And you are told that that's a 155 millimeter gun in that bunker down there. And there's 6 of them. Your mission is to go in there and sneak into those bunkers and destroy those guns and kill all the Germans around and get in your way.
The men must sail to the foot of Pointe du Hoc, scale the 100-foot cliff face, and knock out the guns. Luckily, the Ranger divisions have built a reputation for taking on the impossible.
Now, we were not your next-door neighbor, pink cheek guys that you remember. We were all kind of special, and we had something burning within us. We were ready for action. We were gung-ho fellows. We loved excitement and adventure. And, of course, the most adventurous activity you can get into is warfare. Slightly dangerous now and then, but it's exciting.
General Omar Bradley, the principal commander in the field on D-Day, knew that the mission to destroy the Pointe du Hoc guns called for men with a special kind of determination.
General Bradley had experience with the Rangers in North Africa and Sicily, and he said, those damn guys can do anything. He said, now I know they'll knock those guns out, but there may not be much left of them after that.
The plan calls for the Rangers to go in at 6:30 a.m., just ahead of the first landing waves on Omaha Beach. They will then only have a short time in which to climb the cliffs and destroy the guns. But at first light, the plan is already breaking down.
On D-Day morning, about daybreak, we were all straining our eyes, trying to make out something, you know, on the horizon. As things began to get clearer and clearer, it didn't look right. And it was Colonel Rudder, who was in the boat just ahead of me, who was the first really to take action. Said, hell, that's not Point du Hoc. And he turned around to his bosun and gave him an order to flank right. And he wouldn't. So the colonel drew himself up. He's a big man, turned around and says, right rudder. And this kid was so scared, he just gave it that, you see. And that turned the whole column of boats. And there we were, only within rifle range, really, of the coast.
The Rangers have now lost the element of surprise. Hidden beneath the cratered surface of Point du Hoc is an underground concrete fortress. German troops are now emerging from this lair and quickly man the defenses.
We arrived 38 minutes late, you see, 7:08. And the Germans were up on the top side, shooting at us coming in.
The Rangers will now have to climb the cliffs in full view of the enemy. But they must destroy the Point du Hoc guns, no matter what the cost.
You pour the blood out of your boots and keep right on going. The thing you want to constantly keep in mind, you've got to achieve that objective. That's what you're here for. And I yelled up, I said, boys, they're throwing grenades. Turn your faces in and your butts out. If you got to get some shrapnel, your butt, you know, could handle that shrapnel a lot better than your face.
Some Rangers are shot, others fall to their deaths. But there is no question of giving in.
And they were trying to cut the rope. And they were trying to shoot our fellows off the ropes. And they dropped grenades on it. Anything they could do or think of to drive us back in the sea, they were trying to do. And we, on the other hand, were trying everything we could think of to get up there and kill them.
About that time, there was a hellish explosion. And the last thing I remember was all of this rocks and mud and stuff coming and rolling down the hill. And I was out for I don't know how long. And when I woke up, it was the pain in my legs. And I learned later that I had blood blisters on my legs. And I looked around and looked up there, and here's this German soldier leaning over the cliff. He had his chin in his hand like that, leaning over, you see. I looked around for my Tommy gun. It was butt out, muzzle down in the mud. I pulled it out, and he was still standing there. I said, well, you bastard. I raised up. Click. It wouldn't fire. My gun was clogged up with mud. And I thought to myself, ain't this a hell of a note? Here I am in the damnedest war in history. It was no gun. Now, why that German up there didn't shoot me, I don't know. He could have, very easily. He could have picked me off.
While James Eichner must resume his climb from ground level, other Rangers are nearing the cliff top.
And as Bob and I were pulling ourselves up the rope, we were maybe 10 feet on the top, when Bob said to me, he says, I can't make it. Can you help me? And I said, honest to God, Bob, I can't help you because I'm wondering myself if I got enough strength left to get to the top. And then I looked up and I saw Reuben up there, and I yelled up to Rube, I said, Rube, grab Bob, his strength's about to give out. And he reached over and grabbed him by the back of the neck and slung him over the top of the cliff.
Both Rommel and Eichner reach the top of Point du Hoc. but others are not so fortunate. 16 men die while climbing the cliffs. When the surviving Rangers reach the top, they are shocked at the devastation wreaked by Allied bombers.
When we got up there, it looked like the moon. There were so many shell holes and craters. You run into this shell hole, it would have some Krauts in it, the next would have Rangers in it.
They must now seek out and destroy the 155mm guns. But when they reach the bunkers, they are dumbfounded to find these weapons missing.
That was a horrifying experience to sacrifice the life of men and then find when you got there the guns weren't there.
The German troops must have moved their guns inland to keep them safe from Allied bombers.
So we had to still carry out the mission, find them wherever they are as soon as possible, render them inoperative as quickly as possible, so that tens of thousands of other men won't die.
Leonard Lommel and Jack Kuhn head inland to hunt down the German weapons.
And we didn't know where we were going. It was the only road there, and we saw these marks on the road, like wheel marks.
Lommel and Kuhn follow the tracks 1.5 miles inland. The trail leads them to an apple orchard where they stumble upon the well-concealed guns.
And there were 5 of them, and we just lucked upon them. And there was nobody guarding them. In the other direction was a 50-man armored patrol of Germans coming at us. They passed Jack and I within 20 feet of us. Now we got to stay alive. We got to destroy those guns, render them inoperable.
Using incendiary grenades, Leonard Lommel and Jack Kuhn soon disable the guns.
We had accomplished our objective. The patrol had found the big guns and put them out of business. We had cut the highway and denied its use to the enemy. He couldn't send reinforcements down to Omaha because we had him blocked off, and had knocked out the communications. We had accomplished our mission.
This photograph, taken on D-Day morning, shows James Eichner and his buddies resting during a lull in the fighting.
We had relaxed there in our little shell hole, me sitting there taking a drink out of my canteen. And we expected to see our relief coming down the highway at any time. They were supposed to get there at noon on D-Day.
In fact, it will be a full 2 days before reinforcements reach the Rangers on Pointe du Hoc. In the meantime, they will have to fight on alone, holding their position in the face of relentless counterattacks. By the time reinforcements finally arrive, only 90 Rangers out of the original 225-strong force will still be standing. Further along the coast, waves of Allied troops are now approaching Omaha Beach. The landing craft are no longer in any danger from the guns of Pointe du Hoc. But this beach landing will prove to be one of the bloodiest episodes of World War II. In the months before D-Day, air recon pilots have become familiar with the French coast. But today, June the 6th, 1944, will be different. Today, they will be photographing history in the making.
There were so many aircraft in the air. It was a matter of keeping your eyes open and weaving left and right to avoid formations, squadrons of bombers coming in. And when I looked down at the sea, there were so many battleships, destroyers, and landing craft, I felt I could have jumped out and not got my feet wet.
Throughout the whole of D-Day, the men of the recon squadrons patrolled the Normandy skies, recording the landings as they happened.
The plan was to photograph the whole invasion coast, flying back and forth parallel to the beach.
Far beneath the recon planes, and clearly visible on the earliest photos from the day, are the first waves of Allied landing craft. They are heading in towards Omaha Beach.
the rocket ships began to fire. The excitement was unbelievable. And the sea was terrible. That boat was floundering around. And I looked behind me and men were seasick.
As we got in a little bit closer, when we got in, say, 300 or 400 yards from the shore, we started taking artillery and mortars, and they started falling around. And of course, they would send a geyser of water up, and they would rain right back on us. And then your belly really got to churning. It was getting pretty hairy then.
The German defensive troops ahead of them are battle-hardened men, reinforcements drawn from the Eastern Front. Yet even experienced soldiers such as these are stunned by the size of the invasion fleet heading towards them.
When the landing fleet arrived, it was unbelievably huge. We said, this can't be happening, so many ships. The horizon was black with ships. But when they came closer, we quickly got into the bunkers and manned the machine guns.
We thought we were going to walk across the beach. We thought it was going to be a cakewalk. And I remember telling the rest of them, I said, we're going to catch hell.
The German bunkers are largely undamaged, and Allied landing craft on their final approach are sailing directly towards them.
You can see the tracer bullets zigzagging across the beach. The puffs of smoke from the mortars, and you could hear the artillery shells going over and so forth. We didn't know whether we were going to land right in front of a German pillbox or a gun emplacement or what.
When that ramp went down, the captain went off first. By the time he hit the end of the runway, he was full of bullets. The machine gun just opened up. They had a sort of crossfire from two different guns up in the cliff.
I fired my gun, positioned less than 200 meters from the beach. It was absolutely horrific for the landing troops. A comrade shouted to me, "Franz, don't shoot too soon. Wait until they jump into the water." When the ramps came down and they jumped, most of them fell into the water. Whether they were dead or injured, we didn't know.
Two other men went off. One of them was a friend of mine. He was hit. I was the fourth man. And this was the first time I'd ever been under fire, remember. It's the first time anybody tried to kill me. And when the excitement of being scared to death, I fell off to the side. And I went straight to the bottom. Now, this water was cold. It was cold as blue blazes.
And it was chaos. People were screaming, you know, some were getting hit and some were drowning because they had all this equipment. We had 60 pounds of equipment on, and they couldn't keep their head above water, and they were hanging on to me. I was 6'5", and they were pulling me under. And it was terrible trying to get in to where we could breathe.
And when I come back up, got my feet on the bottom and give a push, and I come up, and the captain was hollering, "I'm here to help me." And I started towards him. I was maybe 10, 12 feet from him. But then I seen blood, water, just bubbling up red. And I said, man, I better save my own life. There's no need. And at this time, I looked back, and all the rest of them coming off the boat were being just cut down like you would. I hadn't counted on this. I was the only survivor. There were 30 men on board that boat, and I was the only man to get off alive.
So I got up as close to the water's edge as I could, and my number 1 and number 2 gunners were right with me. We lost a machine gun in the water. We had the tripod, which was worthless without a gun, and we had 1 box of ammunition. And so I lay there on the beach and was trying to decide when to go across, and I could still see the machine gun tracer bullets, firing across. The tide was coming in real fast. It's a terrible tide there on Omaha Beach.
The tide comes in so fast at Omaha that many injured men are unable to crawl to safety. They will die alone in the rising surf.
I finally got to the edge of the water, and I heard somebody holler my name, and it was my sergeant. Somehow he had made it to the beach, but he was badly wounded. And he raised up, hollering at me to come help him. And when he raised up on his elbow, a sniper up in the cliffs spotted him. And hit him right in the head with that telescope rifle, just like you deer hunt. And when that bullet hit his head, he just exploded. What was left of his head flopped down in the sand. And I knew there wasn't no need going over there. So I buried my face and head, put my hands over my head and everything the best I could, because I figured he'd seen me too. He'd almost bound to see me. And I just waited there for my shot to see me. And I just waited there for my shot to come. But somehow, evidently, he got distracted by bigger, better targets or something. And he didn't pull a trigger on me. And I started to crawl, just inch at a time. And I would peep up and see a dead body. And I'd crawl to that dead body and lay beside him for a while. During this time, I passed body parts, little everything. You can't imagine what was laying there. I run upon men that were not dead, but were just blown apart. It's just amazing how sometime you can live being blown up as bad as you were. And they were screaming and hollering, but there was nothing I could do for them. I just crawled by. At this point, I want to tell you, this is the first combat I was in, and I was scared. I was scared good.
On the eastern flank of the D-Day invasion lie the British and Canadian beaches Gold, Juno and Sword. At 7:26 a.m. on Sword Beach, the first assault waves run into danger.
We went aground about 10 yards up the beach because the fire was so intense, and I did not perceive it safe to advance any further.
The troops are taking mortar machine gun fire and will be cut down if they advance. Fortunately, an ingenious British-designed tank comes to the rescue. Floating DD tanks were constructed especially for D-Day, and 21 of them have made it safely onto the beach.
And then the DD tank came up, and he opened the hatch and shouted, "Where's the fire?" Round to the right, about 200 yards. He swiveled his gun around and fired one shot. No more mortar fire, complete silence, and even the machine gun fire from the enemy had gone. The gun on the DD tank was absolutely essential. It dominated the beach. Once it was on, that was it.
Throughout the morning, DD tanks continue to attack German positions on Sword. Amidst the battle, successive waves of troops are offloaded onto the beach. Some men from these later waves are remarkably level-headed. Showing no concern for gunfire and mortar blasts, they sit down to enjoy a mug of the national drink.
When soldiers hit the beach, the first thing they wanted to do was, after a long sea journey, was have a brew of tea. We had to discourage them from doing that because we didn't want them on the beach in groups brewing up tea. We wanted the beaches clear so that people could move over it, tanks, vehicles and everything else. No, you get off, knock those Germans out and then you could have a cup of tea.
The British troops soon regroup and before long continue their advance. This aerial photograph shows men and vehicles streaming inland from Sword Beach. The British advance has been boosted by the DD tanks. But in the rough seas off Omaha Beach, all but one of the floating tanks are swamped and sink. The men here will have no armored support to protect them from German machine guns. Their only chance of cover lies far ahead at the foot of a concrete sea wall. To reach it, Sergeant Bob Slaughter must cross a great stretch of exposed beach.
It was 300 or 400 yards of flat sand. That's 3 football fields or 4 football fields end to end, and it was a long way to go. While I was lying there contemplating what to do, I saw one of the men from the boat to our right. He starts running across the beach. They shoot him and he falls to the sand. And he starts screaming because he's wounded. And one of our medics went out to help him. And they shot the medic. And, you know, that put a chill into my thinking about going across. But, you know, here comes a big wave and it's pushing us in. So I decided to go, take my chances.
Bob Slaughter tells his men to prepare for the long sprint for cover across the exposed width of Omaha Beach.
So I started running across the beach as low as I could go and as fast as I could go. I keep running and running and running and running. It seemed like forever. And I got to the seawall, and here comes Williams and all Gary right behind me. I was out of breath and I was scared to death, you know, and I tried to light a cigarette. And my hands were shaking so bad I couldn't get my cigarette lit. And I had to finally compose myself, and I just kept saying to myself, get a hold of yourself, you know, you got to do this, you got to do it.
And finally, after a long time, inch at a time, I got to that wall. And there I met a buddy of mine that was on another boat named Mac Smith from West Virginia. And he had an eye hanging out on his face. And I slapped a bandage on it. And I stayed there with him and 5 or 6 other men for a while. We were sort of protected from the machine gun, but the tide was coming in. And dead bodies were rolling, just like a log. And we'd run out and pull one in. The Germans would shoot at us if they seen us. If we found a live one, which we did find some few alive, we got a medic and we managed to save a few of them. But that's what we did most of the day, was drag dead bodies.
The landings on Omaha have clearly not gone to plan. Dead and wounded cover the beach. And those men left alive are pinned down at the sea wall. To stay here will mean certain death. But it seems like suicide to move ahead with no artillery or tank support. By 8:30 a.m., the D-Day commander, General Omar Bradley, contemplates the abandonment of Omaha Beach. He even considers landing the next waves of American troops on the British beaches. But General Bradley has one last card to play. Positioned just off the Vierville Draw is Fireman Dean Hatton on his ship, the USS McCook.
The first troops are practically annihilated. They're just everyone destroyed because they pulled machine guns and mortars in right over top of that village and just pounded the first troops that went in. Just destroying landing craft as fast as they come up on the shore. I remember the beach trying to get up the hill into Verville-sur-Mer. It looked like they were all knocked out.
Because of the smoke obscuring Omaha Beach, the destroyers cannot identify targets on land. Their only option is to move closer to shore. But in these shallow waters, they risk running aground. They must make an agonizing decision. Watch the infantry be wiped out, or risk losing their ships.
The skipper said, if we have to run this ship ashore to knock out those guns, we're going to do it. We wanted to protect the troops that were landing because they were taking a horrible beating. When we came in for closer fire, we could see the men on the beach. It was just a jumble of vehicles that had been hit and littered the beach. We came in within 500 yards, just almost scraping bottom for destroyer. The landing craft were being fired upon, and we tried to knock out the gun emplacements before the landing craft went in. Some we knocked off on the first run, 4 or 5 inch firing, rapid fire, but take a pillbox right off of the side of the cliff.
The boats kept targeting our bunker's gun openings, firing into them. We had some protection, but not against direct fire. Their firepower was aimed precisely at us, and no defenses could withstand that.
The destroyers cruise along the full length of Omaha Beach, shelling German defensive positions.
We moved up and down the shoreline at high speed, just hitting pillboxes for the first hour or so. And then as the troops got ashore, they could direct fire where they needed it. After we'd hit a machine gun nest or a mortar, they'd say, "Well done, McCook," and we'd go on to another target.
For the Germans on the receiving end of these shells, the impact is devastating. By 10:30 a.m., this decisive action by the destroyers has turned the tide at Omaha Beach. It gives a great morale boost to the men down at the sea wall, and in small groups, they begin the next phase of attack.
I knew that if I froze up, I was dead. I knew I had to keep going. Although I knew men had froze up, it surprised me, one or two that did.
Still facing a barrage of German gunfire, the men start to move off the beaches, up to the hills and bluffs inland.
We all found a path up to the top of the bluff. It was a minefield on both sides of the path, and it said Octoon Mining all over the place. And we got up there and we started digging in. That was our mission, was to get on top and then be ready for a counterattack that we knew was coming. We were expecting, tanks within 24 hours. As soon as we got up on top, we could see this German Nibelwerfer position. And he was just firing down on the beach, and they were just plastering the beach. And so we didn't have anything to knock out a gun like that. It was actually a battery of them.
A first sergeant with Bob Slaughter has one of the few functioning radios on Omaha Beach.
Presley made contact with a destroyer out in the channel. He directed the destroyer to fire around to see where it landed. And then he walked it into that target and knocked out that Nibelwerfer position. So that was one of the great things that I saw on D-Day. They saved a lot of lives by knocking that thing out.
All across Omaha Beach, small groups of men and officers are taking the initiative, slowly making progress inland. The Allies have broken through, but they have paid a terrible price for their success. By 11 a.m., hundreds of men have already been killed on Omaha Beach, and the day is not yet over.
I never dreamed we'd lose this many men. But there again, I had never known the horror of war either, when men are blown apart, killed by the dozens, I didn't dream it would happen.
Over to the west, on Utah Beach, casualties have not been so heavy.
When we stopped, it was right up on the beach. The ramp went down and we walked on the beach and didn't even get our feet wet.
The defending troops at Utah consist mostly of Ost battalions, made up of men from Eastern Europe who have been conscripted into the German army. Many are reluctant to risk their lives fighting for Hitler.
They were totally disorganized. We were lucky to that degree that they were disorganized. So hence many of them just threw their hands up, others were killed, many of them just took off, and we captured quite a few of them. So they offered little resistance.
But as the men from Utah Beach move inland, they start to encounter heavier opposition. They're also moving into very unfamiliar terrain.
As soon as we hit the other side, we were in hedgerow country, and we never had any training in hedgerow fighting. I never even heard the word hedgerow, and these Germans were waiting for us behind there. You'd move a little bit and you'd think everything was, oh, this isn't going to be bad. Then all of a sudden you encounter a lot of fire.
The thing that bothered us the most was the snipers in the trees, you know, the enemy snipers in the trees. They had clothing that would match the vegetation, the trees, and you never knew when you were going to be running into one of those.
The hedgerows were of course an advantage when defending a position, as you could camouflage yourselves or hide behind them.
Paratroopers from the 101st Airborne had their key landing zones in this area. Since 1 a.m. they have been battling to clear the hedgerows and mop up German resistance. Their primary mission is to seize the causeways, the road exits leading off Utah Beach, and to rendezvous with the ground troops as they move inland. But in the chaos and confusion of the night, the paratroopers have fallen well behind schedule. A large force of ground troops is already heading inland from Utah Beach. They are moving up Causeway Number 2 and towards the ancient farmhouse known as Breakour Manor.
At Breakour, the Germans had been smart enough to have concealed in a hedgerow, and camouflage it very well for 105 cannon.
Time is running out. As the ground troops move inland, they are heading right into the path of these German guns. If they start firing, hundreds of Allied infantry will be killed. The race is on. Can the 101st Airborne destroy the German guns before there is a massacre? "8:30 a.m. on D-Day morning, and all along the invasion front, men are fighting their way inland. But the Allied soldiers coming ashore on Utah Beach are advancing right into the path of German 105mm heavy guns. These are hidden inland at Breakour Manor, and if they open fire, there will be carnage done on Utah Beach. The paratroopers of the 101st Airborne are attempting to knock out these weapons. A head-on attack at Breakour has already failed. So the commanding officer asks Dick Winters to try a different tactic.
Colonel Strayer said, "Take care of this fire from the right flank." "Yes, sir." I crawled out there by myself. Got close enough, and then I could see where this position was. I decided I was going to hit this thing from the flank. Lieutenant Compton, 2 men, crawl out ahead with instructions when you get close enough to throw hand grenades in that trench. When you run into a position like that, get into the trench on one of the flanks, and then you can take them on one at a time. That's exactly what we did. We got in that trench, took that first gun, and then took on the balance of them. So it took a little time, but we took them all out.
Dick Winters and his small group of 12 men have destroyed all 4 German guns. But they are now taking fire from concealed machine gun positions. Winters decides to pull his men back. But as he does so, he stumbles upon some intriguing German documents.
As soon as I picked them up, I realized what I'm looking at. I'm looking at maps that have the entire defense for the entire Utah beach. Down to barbed wire, minefields, the way the machine guns were distributed, their strong points. My goodness, I must get this back to battalion right away.
Hundreds of American lives could be saved if these maps reach the Allied commanders in time.
And battalion looked at them, realized how important these were, and they gave them to Lieutenant Nixon. He took off for the beach. Within a few minutes, the defensive plans for the entire beach is in the hands of the commander.
The American generals are thrilled with the maps of the Utah beach defenses. As a reward for their efforts, General Joseph Collins sends up the first available tanks to help Dick Winters finish off his work at Breakhall Manor.
He brought the first 2 tanks to come up causeway number 2 to me. I had to crawl up on the tank itself and point out the hedgerow back here where all these machine guns are. These tankers had not had a chance to fire a shot yet. They had a heyday. They started firing those 50 caliber machine guns, and I thought they would tear the place up. They didn't know when to stop. They wiped them out in a hurry.
The battle for Breakhall Manor is over. The 101st Airborne has cleared the way for the assault troops to move inland.
We eliminated all this fire that would have been going down causeway number 2 for any troops trying to come in from the beach. They could have caused an awful lot of casualties and delayed the landing. As it was, the casualties were very, very light on Utah Beach, of which we're proud.
Back down on the beaches, the worst of the fighting is now over. Some of the men who earlier fought their way inland now return to the coast to pick up supplies and ammunition.
Things had improved a lot. You couldn't just walk up and down the beach, you know, you would get killed because there were still snipers and there was still a machine gun or 2 up there that were still operable.
Omaha Beach is still far from secure, but German prisoners are already being brought in for interrogation.
Down the beach, I saw a lieutenant with a couple of German prisoners. He was asking them where the minefields were. And the German, all he would say was his name, rank, and serial number. Now this guy was a little skinny, and he was ugly, and you know, he didn't look like a soldier at all. I would always picture the German soldiers as these, you know, great big blonde-haired guys. This officer just got mad, and he says, "Damn it, he says, if you don't tell me where the minefields are, I'm gonna blow your head off." And all he would say, name, rank, and serial number. So this officer shot his carbine right between his legs, and this German looked up at him and said, "Nick's here." I thought, my God, these guys are fanatics. And he was. I mean, you know, they didn't care. I mean, they were tough guys. Didn't look tough, but they were tough.
These experienced, even fanatical troops are unlikely to step aside as the Allies push inland. In fact, just a few miles south of the beaches, armored panzer divisions are poised to counterattack. By 1 p.m. on D-Day, across all 5 invasion beaches, the Allies have cracked the Atlantic Wall and smashed their way into occupied France. British troops are now racing towards their key objective, the city of Caen. Whoever controlled this city would control the road to Paris. The Germans are well aware of this, and in the months before the invasion have strengthened their defences around Caen. The greatest threat to the Allies is the 21st Panzer Division, based on the outskirts of the city. Allied bombers have been pounding Caen since midnight. And in the early afternoon, their next bombardment is about to begin.
We left our base at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and we had to strike what was known as a German headquarters command. This was in the city of Caen. It was an old castle that the Germans had confiscated and used for their headquarters. We had the honor of hitting it pretty hard. And our purpose was to drop enough bombs on there to kill everybody in there and to knock out their communications systems.
The B-26s do indeed find their targets, and by early afternoon, much of Caen is burning.
From the high ground, about 14 kilometers outside Caen, we looked down and saw a cloud of black smoke hanging over the city. And we thought to ourselves, my God, this is war.
Werner Kortenhaus is part of the German 21st Panzer Division. And after losing precious hours waiting for orders, they have finally been directed to advance through Caen and on to attack the Allied beaches.
The main part of the division tried to drive north through Caen, but they found it difficult. Because of the bombing, the city streets were impassable, so they had to drive around Caen. They didn't reach their attack positions until 4 p.m. And by then, it was far too late.
Yet even this late in the day, the heavily armoured Panzer Division could still create problems for the Allies moving inland. The German tanks continue their advance towards the Allied beachhead.
We were very unhappy. We were concerned about the dangers of driving during daylight, knowing that we could come under air attack. We would have much preferred to have driven by night.
Thousands of Allied fighters are patrolling the skies over Normandy, seeking out targets of opportunity.
We would attack anything that moved, no matter what it was. We would attack anything that moved, no matter what it was. Usually, as far as troops were concerned, we would generally only have to make one pass, and then they would get off the road and try to hide someplace.
As the German Panzer Division moves up toward the beaches, it is spotted by fighter aircraft.
We experienced an air attack at about 5 p.m. just east of Caen. We were standing next to our tanks, awaiting further orders, when the fighters approached us, flying low. We crawled under our tanks so that we had protection above us. But one man made the mistake of trying to climb inside via the tank hatch, and he was killed. We were shocked at how easy it was to destroy our tanks. We had thought they were good machines and not easy to knock out. But when you see 5 tanks blowing up in 10 minutes, you soon become disillusioned.
The Panzer-led counterattacks have run out of steam. In the face of such concentrated air power, they simply cannot advance.
And then something remarkable happened. Towards 6 p.m., there was a massive influx of around 600 planes from England, towing gliders. They flew right overhead and on towards Caen.
These gliders contain thousands of British and American reinforcements. They will further strengthen the Allied foothold on France.
And this influx caused the divisional commander to fear that we were being surrounded. So he cancelled the order to attack and immediately ordered all forces to retreat and dig in to defend the area north of Caen.
The Allies do not capture the city of Caen on D-Day, but their beachhead is secure. As darkness begins to fall, the aerial images reveal the vast fleets of gliders lining the fields of Normandy. Over the beaches, vehicles can be seen streaming inland. Even more importantly, the recon photos show the enemy's positions at the end of the day. Just hours after the recon pilots land back in Britain, these images will be in the hands of intelligence experts.
These photographs taken on D-Day would be analyzed by the intelligence officer, who in turn would go to the general and saying, that's where we are, that's where they are, that's where we have to send the fighter bombers to counteract them, that's where we have to direct the artillery shells from offshore. And all sorts of decisions are made on what the photographs revealed as to the disposition of the friendly and enemy forces.
For Ray Beckley, D-Day is now over. He, along with the other recon pilots, is back at base, preparing for a good night's sleep.
Thanking God I was an Air Force reconnaissance pilot rather than a ground pounder. Sometimes you were very happy to be a pilot, come back for a clean uniform, a decent meal, and a decent bed.
There are no soft beds for the men who have landed in Normandy. After long hours of fighting, they rest when and where they can, often disturbed by enemy activity.
D-Day night, we're in one hedgerow, and across the field in another hedgerow are the Germans. We were tired. We had been up all day the day before, up all night, and had a hard day's fighting. We were ready to settle down. The Germans, on the other hand, they were fresh. They're shooting their guns in the air, holler. I couldn't figure this thing out. Are these guys going to have a night attack? I was very concerned.
In most places, there are no German night attacks. As darkness cloaks Normandy, the men of D-Day reflect upon all that they have witnessed. Many have seen their fellow soldiers die right before their eyes.
It's not like old movies, you know, patriotic music playing in the background. He dies dirty, scared, hurt, in pain. And he has to lay there. You can't move him. He lays there until the grave registration comes up and picks him up some days later after fighting moves on. Those men were piled up on the beach after D-Day like wood.
And those people were young, vibrant, some of them smart, and they didn't live to see their 20th birthday. Missed so much of life. Never saw a microwave oven or a jet plane or some of the things we take for granted.
Across the 5 invasion beaches, the Allies have suffered approximately 10,000 casualties. But over 146,000 American, British and Canadian troops have safely entered Normandy. It took Hitler 4 years and a vast proportion of Germany's resources to build the Atlantic Wall. the Allies have broken through in just one day. Despite the terrible cost in human life, the landings have been a success. D-Day is the turning point, and from now on the Germans will be on the defensive, slowly retreating across Europe. Dick Winters is one of thousands of men who will fight on through the long months of war ahead. But for now, his thoughts turn to home.
I got on my knees. I said, "Dear Lord, thank you for helping me live through D-Day. Now, if I live through the war, I hope to go home and find a quiet piece of land and have peace and quiet for the rest of my life." I'm proud of the fact that I did exactly that.
Today on the Normandy coast, the guns are silent, and the Atlantic Wall crumbles into the sea. The beaches once stained with the blood of so many young men are now peaceful. Yet the epic events of that day and the countless acts of selfless heroism resonate through time. 60 years later, their memory lives on.